Hello, Trinity candidates, P7. This is Mr. Kiyingi again. This is our second lesson. This is lesson 2. Before I begin the lesson, I want to make an appeal to all of you. First of all, follow the sequence of these lessons, because we have recorded very many lessons, but we want you to follow them as they follow each other. So you have to know which lesson was first, which one comes next, because if you don't follow them, you'll be confused. So for SST, this is lesson number 2. I appeal to you as well to take this work seriously. Please, candidates, I know you are home. We are appealing to your parents. Please, parents, if you are watching this, help us where we are not and follow and supervise these children. Let the children write the work in the books, even the exercise, the work given at the end. Let them attempt those questions. We shall provide you our WhatsApp numbers for the children to ask where they didn't understand. If possible, even to submit, to send pictures of the work as evidence that the work was done, and we give our response. We shall be availing our WhatsApp numbers. So we kindly beg you, dear parents, to assist us where we are not, so that the children, and let this work be written in our class books, because when we come back, we are teaching on syllabus. When we come back, after the government has opened schools, we shall not repeat this work. We shall consider it as work having been taught. We shall continue from where I would have stopped. So please, copy the notes. I'm requesting you, please, candidates. So this lesson is going to mark the end of our topic of vegetation. It is only P7 East. When we come back, where there is some work I had not taught you, but when we come back, I'll find a way of covering it. But P7 West, for you, you are completing vegetation. If I finish this lesson, vegetation will be completely covered. Before I introduce what I'm going to teach today, in my first lesson, which was about factors affecting vegetation distribution, I remember I even left some work for you to do. So since you are at home, you are going to help me and mark yourself. And I want you to be honest, please. Mutebi Elvis, I know you very well. Take this work seriously. The first question was, explain how do each of the following factors affect vegetation distribution? And we had them, we had climate. So if they ask you a question, how does climate? So the question was, how does climate affect vegetation distribution? Climate, in brackets, I told you climate and rainfall are the same. Climate is a subset of, rainfall is a subset of climate. So if they ask you, how does climate affect vegetation distribution? Another person can ask, how does rainfall affect vegetation distribution? Remember, I told you, vegetation distribution, we have different types of vegetation. Vegetation is not uniform. So what makes that vegetation not to be the same? When you move across Uganda, you find some areas have forests, some areas have a lot of grass. So what makes that vegetation to keep changing like that? One of the factors is climate. And we said, how does climate affect rainfall distribution? You say, places with good climate. Places with good climate have more vegetation. Have more vegetation than places with poor climate. Than those with poor climate. So if you answer like that, there I would have answered that question. You have explained how climate affects rainfall, vegetation distribution. Where there is climate, you can substitute and put rainfall. Places with much rainfall have more vegetation than places with poor rainfall or with little rainfall. The second was fertility of the soil. Fertility of the soil. So we are giving the answers to the exercise I left you with in lesson 1. Because number 1 was asking you to explain how each of these factors affects vegetation distribution. So how does soil fertility affect vegetation distribution? This one is very easy. You just say places with fertile soil have more vegetation than places with poor soils. Places with fertile soil have more vegetation. Have more vegetation than those with poor soil. So, in case you are asked in an exam, how does soil fertility affect vegetation distribution? Places with fertile soil have more vegetation than those with poor soil. Of course, you know, without soil, no vegetation can grow. I'm going to use this part of the blackboard again, so I'll go back to where I started. The third factor affecting vegetation distribution is human activities or man's activities. Man can affect the presence of vegetation. How? Some activities of man preserve vegetation, while others destroy vegetation. Those of you know me very well. If we are in class, now I'll be telling you to shout this answer. So, in your sitting room where you are spread all over the country, how do human activities affect vegetation distribution? Some activities of man preserve vegetation, while others destroy vegetation. So here, you have to know which activities of man preserve vegetation and which ones destroy vegetation. That is also very important. Those which preserve vegetation, very quickly, we have afforestation, reforestation, swamp conservation, zero grazing, etc., etc. Then those which destroy vegetation, we have activities like deforestation, swamp drainage, overgrazing. Those ones destroy vegetation. All those are carried out by man. Bush burning, they destroy vegetation. But man also has activities which can improve vegetation. So man, in other words, what this point tells us is that if we want vegetation to exist, then man has to be responsible and avoid those bad activities which destroy vegetation. Then lastly, because in that lesson, I gave you 4 factors which affect vegetation distribution, and the 4th was altitude. So, how does altitude affect vegetation distribution? First of all, you can define what altitude is. Altitude is the height of land above the sea level. Altitude brings about change in temperature. That's why we say the higher you go, the cooler it becomes. The higher you go, the cooler it becomes. So how does that, the higher you go, the cooler it becomes, affect vegetation? Places on a low altitude are warm. Let me change it and I say, places on a low altitude have more vegetation due to warm temperature while those on a high altitude have less vegetation. Due to low temperature, due to cool temperature. So if we're in class, this is the point where I'll be telling you, everybody, how does altitude affect vegetation distribution? And all of us would be answering. Places on a low altitude have more vegetation due to warm temperature, while those on a high altitude have less vegetation due to cool temperature. That was question number 1. So from that question, I can ask you another simple question and say, mention the factors affecting vegetation distribution in Africa. Mention the factors affecting vegetation distribution. So you just list them: climate or rainfall, fertility of the soil, human activities, and altitude. Then when you are asked to explain how each affects vegetation distribution, you just do what we are doing here. That was number 1 of that exercise. Number 2 of that exercise was asking us to give reasons why animals live in different vegetation zones. Give reasons why animals live in different vegetation zones. In my lesson, fortunately enough today, I'm going to give you, here it is, you can use this, that animals live in different vegetation zones. In equatorial forests, you find there monkeys, you find there gorillas, you find there baboons, etc., etc. In grasslands, you find there zebras, antelopes, lions. Temperate grasslands, you find there foxes, deer, etc. What makes those animals to live in a particular vegetation zone? And if you remember from the first lesson, you can go back and watch that lesson again. I said the reasons why animals live in different vegetation zones. What makes a monkey to live in a forest? What makes a lion to live in grass, much as a lion does not eat grass? Can you imagine? A lion does not feed on grass, but you find it in grass. So, what makes animals to live? That was number 2 answers. Number 1 is due to presence of food. Due to presence of their food. An animal will live in a vegetation zone where its food is found. So a monkey eats fruits from trees. That's why it is in a forest. An antelope which feeds on grass, you'll find it in grassland. So it is in grassland because that's where its food is. Then number 2, due to presence of shelter. Animals settle where they will have shelter. Monkeys live in the trees, so that's their shelter. That's why they are found there. Those which live in the grass will go to the grass because that's their habitat, that's their home. Then number 3 was due to presence of comfort and safety. So that is very clear. An animal chooses a vegetation zone that will make it comfortable and safe. Once it feels comfortable and safe, it will settle in that vegetation zone. So that was number 2 for the exercise I left in lesson 1. Give reasons why animals live in different vegetation zones. 1, due to presence of their food, due to presence of shelter, due to presence of comfort and safety. Number 3, the last question in that exercise, actually it was number 3 and 4, but they were asking about the same thing. The question was asking you to give examples of activities of man that can improve vegetation or that preserve vegetation. Give examples, mention activities of man that can conserve or preserve or improve vegetation. And those ones are very easy, simple: afforestation, reforestation, swamp conservation, zero grazing. In my next exercise, I'll ask you to tell me, to go back to your, to test if you can still remember the definition of those terms. What is afforestation? What is reforestation? Because they are taught in P5, P4 there. So as part of our revision at the end of this lesson, I'll give you a question asking you to define for me afforestation, reforestation. Agroforestry is also an activity of man that improves vegetation. Then the last question, which wanted you to give the activities which destroy vegetation, we have deforestation, swamp drainage. Swamps have vegetation. So when people destroy swamps for other activities, the vegetation is lost. We have overgrazing, bush burning. All those are activities of man that can destroy vegetation. And that was our lesson 1. Now I'm moving over to lesson 2. Lesson 2 is going to mark the conclusion of the topic, vegetation. So after this lesson, that will be the end of vegetation. And in this lesson, in the last lesson, I gave you reasons why animals live in different vegetation zones. In this lesson, we are giving, actually this lesson is going to help me to revise the vegetation zones of Africa because they are all listed here. Then we have the animals, and I've not listed all the animals in the vegetation zones. I've just given examples. There are others. And for some vegetation zones, I picked out only those animals we are familiar with. Because some of these vegetation zones, we don't have them in Uganda, we don't have them in East Africa. So you might find some animals when they are new to us. That's why I've concentrated on those we know, those which are common. So we have equatorial forests. This is a vegetation zone in Africa. So as part of my revision now, I would be asking you, if I had you in class or where you are, can you name the countries where equatorial forests are found? DRC, Congo Brazzaville, Gabon, Central African Republic. In Uganda, we have them around Lake Victoria. So that is the vegetation, thick, dense forests. You remember the characteristics of equatorial forests? Go back to your book and revise. So in forests, we have monkeys, we have gorillas, we have baboons, etc. There are others, chimpanzees, they are there. The reasons why they choose, we answered in the last. Why do these animals live in these vegetation zones? We answered that in the last lesson. Presence of food, presence of shelter, comfort and safety. So monkeys, this is what you will find in equatorial forests. In 2010, PLE of 2010, there was a question from this area in UNEB. Those of you who have PLE, past PLE, open the paper of 2010. I think it was in section A. They asked the children, which type of vegetation provides food for mountain gorillas? Mountain gorillas are found in forests. In Uganda, we have them in Bwindi impenetrable forest. So mountain gorillas get their food from forests. Which type of vegetation? Forests or equatorial forests provide food for mountain gorillas. Then we have grasslands, the tropical grasslands, savanna grasslands. This is the biggest vegetation zone in Africa. In Uganda, it is the biggest. In Africa, it is the biggest. And that's why we find most of our game parks, because there is a lot of grass. So here you find mainly animals which feed on grass, zebras, antelopes. Now, in the same vegetation zone, you find animals which don't feed on grass like lions. And what takes them there? Because their food, what they feed on, is found in that grassland. The lion does not go in grass to eat grass, but what takes it to grass is to eat these grass eaters. So what makes a lion to stay in a grassland yet does not eat grass? A lion stays in grass because that's where its prey is found. The prey, what the lion feeds on is found in a grassland. So it goes there not to eat the grass, but to feed on these grass eating, the zebras and the antelopes. So that's a very common question which they ask us. Why does a lion stay in a grassland yet does not eat grass? Due to presence of its prey. That is the answer. Due to presence of its prey in the grassland. We have temperate grasslands. These ones, we don't have them in East Africa. They are mainly in South Africa. We had learned about them before we broke off due to coronavirus. In P7 West, we had learned this, the temperate grasslands in South Africa. And there we find animals like foxes and deer. This one, we don't have it in Uganda, in East Africa. Then montane vegetation. This is the vegetation found on mountains. If you remember, maybe even in P6 or P5, you must have learned montane vegetation. Very fast, I can summarize it here. So we have grassland here. On a mountain, vegetation is not uniform. Vegetation keeps changing. We have forests, we have bamboo, we have heath, it's a type of grass. Then here we shall have rocks. And if the mountain is too high, there are some mountains which are too high. They go above the snow line. Then on top we shall have snow. So this line here is the snow line. And those of you who remember the class which I taught, P7 West, I'm very sure you can remember I gave you the meters for the snow line. I don't like spoon feeding, but I have nothing to do because I'm not with you, so I'll tell you everything. So the snow line is 4,500 meters. So if a mountain does not reach this height, that mountain will not have snow on top. So this vegetation in this diagram is montane vegetation. That diagram represents montane vegetation. And you must have a reason. You must know, why does this vegetation keep changing? Why isn't it uniform vegetation? And we said this vegetation keeps changing due to change in temperature. At the bottom of the mountain where the temperature is warm, that's why you see, because we said in the last lesson, we explained altitude, the height up, how the higher you go, the cooler it becomes. So at the bottom where the temperatures are warm, that's where you find thick vegetation like grass, like forest. Then as you go up the mountain, as temperature reduces, vegetation also starts to disappear. And up where it is too cold, you have even no vegetation. You have only snow and rocks. So in this, if they brought this diagram and asked you which type of vegetation is this, the answer is montane vegetation. It is found in areas with mountains. And in that type of vegetation, you find animals like rats, wild dogs, these are moles, etc., etc. They also have reasons why they settle there. Maybe that's where their food is, that's where they are comfortable and safe. That's why they go there. Then Mediterranean vegetation, also we don't have it in East Africa. You can use the map of climate to locate where Mediterranean climate is where we have Mediterranean vegetation. We have animals like deer and wolves. Then deserts. Deserts also have animals. And remember the reasons we gave why animals live in vegetation zones. So can you imagine which animals stay in deserts and why do they go there? We have lizards, snakes, mice. There's a lot of sand in the deserts, and that one favors. Mice dig tunnels and they hide there. Then they come out to look for what to eat. Now somebody will ask, now teacher, which food is found in a desert for these animals? They feed on each other. A snake will feed on lizards, a snake will feed on mice, vice versa. So that's how they feed. Then we have a semi-desert. In a semi-desert, another name for semi-desert is scrub. P7 West, you remember, we said the main vegetation in a semi-desert is scrub. Scrub is very dry grass. Grass which is dry. Grass you can look at and you know that this area is dry. There is no rain. So in semi-deserts have characteristics almost similar to desert. So you'll find almost the same animals: snakes, lizards, owls, squirrels. And they feed on each other. They feed on. So these are the animals in different vegetation zones, and the people who set PLE can get questions from here. Like I've told you, they asked the children to mention the vegetation zone which provides the food for mountain gorillas. So as you are reading this, broaden your mind, please, candidates. That is the end of that. The next item, remember we are concluding this topic, and when we conclude this topic, had we not got an interruption, this topic marks the end of first term's work. After this, first term's work would have ended, and then we start second term's work. So after this, in my next lesson, I'll be introducing second term's work. If there is anything under vegetation, like game parks, that is P6 work. When we come back, I'll get time and I go through that very fast. Right now, I wanted to concentrate on what is new to us. We're supposed to talk about game parks here, but game parks are taught in P6, they are taught in P5. So that one I can talk about it when we are back to school. Now, I want us to address this: how vegetation affects population distribution. Population distribution is the way people are scattered, the way people are spread, the way people settle. Does the settlement of people depend on vegetation? The vegetation zones are here. Is there a vegetation zone which attracts people, and is there a vegetation zone that scares away people? That's what we are trying to answer. So how does vegetation affect population distribution? And that one, we can give a sentence to explain how vegetation affects population distribution. We shall say that areas with forests, where the vegetation is a forest, areas with forests have. What do you think, in your opinion? Do forests have many people or few people? Areas with forests have smaller population. Have a smaller population than grasslands. So in case one day you are looking, or when you come back and we do exams, trial tests, or you are looking through past papers and you find a question, how does vegetation affect population distribution? Say areas with forests have smaller population than grasslands. And I know if we are in class, you would be asking me, teacher, what makes a forest to have few people, to have a smaller population? So forests have a small population. Reason number one is, when you look around in Uganda, all our forests are protected by the government. Then number two, they have animals. These animals here, people, if you settle in a forest, then be ready to be disturbed by all these animals. The monkeys will be daily visitors to your garden, and they can even harm you sometimes. So that one also makes people not to settle. They have dangerous animals. Even if you want to construct a new road in a forest, it will be hard. Some of those trees, if you remember the characteristics of equatorial forests, the trees are dense, the trees are very tall, the trees are packed, they have big buttress roots. So just even cutting that tree to construct a road is almost impossible. So due to these reasons, forests have a small population. Then somebody will ask me, why are grasslands densely populated? What makes people to settle in grasslands? Of course, grasslands is just grass. So grasslands most times have fertile soils. You just say they have enough land for farming. If we are together at school, I'll be asking you, what have I said? They have enough land for farming. That's why they have a big population. So vegetation indeed affects how people are distributed, how people are settled. In that, forests have a smaller population than grasslands. So an examiner can form a question and ask you, give examples of vegetation zones that have a big population. Just say grassland. Give an example of a population zone which has a small population. Forests, desert vegetation, because in a desert the climate is not good. Then we shall go this. Here vegetation affects us. It determines where we settle. But even as people, how population distribution affects vegetation. Like already we answered it when we are looking at factors affecting vegetation distribution. I told you human activities. Some activities of man are good, while others are bad to vegetation. So here, population distribution, we are looking at how people are scattered. So we shall repeat this, all of us at home. Areas with a big population have less vegetation than those with a small population. So here I'll ask you, what makes areas with a big population to have less vegetation? Because whenever people are many, they destroy vegetation for different reasons. When people are many, they cut forests to get land for settlement, to get land for farming. When people are many, swamps are destroyed. When people are many, forests are destroyed for road construction, for industries, for settlement, to carry out farming. So that's why we are saying areas with a big population, their vegetation will be less because people will be carrying out deforestation, people will be carrying out swamp drainage for different reasons. But when people are few, then the vegetation has a big chance of not being destroyed. So my very good candidates, Trinity Primary School, with this we have come to the end of the topic, vegetation distribution. My friends of P7 West, for you are covered totally. P7 East, there are some vegetation zones here we are not talked about, but because I wanted us to move together, for you I will cover them when we come back. Now, as my practice is at the end of the lesson, I have to give you some work to do. And here it is today. So we have, why does a lion live in a grassland yet does not? Why does vegetation, how does vegetation affect population distribution? We have just learned about that. We have said areas with forests have smaller population than areas with grasslands. But you must go ahead and know why forests have a small population. They are protected by the government. They have dangerous animals. It is difficult to develop social services in areas of forests. Then why do grasslands have very many people? They have enough land for farming. Then state 2 reasons why forests have low population. Actually, I've just answered that question for you. And why are some vegetation zones sparsely populated? The answers you use here can be the same answers here. That is the end of lesson 2. I'll end by urging you, please take the work seriously. Write it in your books. That is the work we shall check when you come back, when you report, God willing. So we meet again in lesson 3, and please mark the sequence of these lessons. You should know which is lesson 1, you should know which is lesson 2. God bless you. Stay safe.